Hello and welcome to Heritage University Presents. EnviroSpark Energy is going to be joining us talking about electric charging stations, some challenges and some great solutions that are coming within the next year to the next 10 years. My name is Melissa Rogers and I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Heritage Property Management. I know we are late, and I say thank you so much for staying and waiting while we waited out some technical difficulties. We are so thrilled that you are joining us. Tonight we are joined by Jacqueline Kress, who is wonderful, and she oversees, just so that all of you know, she is a community manager, and she also has a super high passion for a lot of the work that she's going to tell you a little bit about tonight in her experience. And what she does is she is now engaging new partnerships with some great companies. And she came and she spoke with our managers a couple of weeks ago, and we just really thought that this would be a great class for all of you as board members. I know it's budget season right now, and so we just wanted to give you some opportunities, especially for those of you that are looking for some great energy items available for some of your associations. So while we are not going to be talking about community-specific related topics, and we're just going to be talking about this in a general overhaul, if you will, if you do have any questions and you have a community manager, please feel free to reach out to them. And if not, we sincerely suggest that you reach out to your attorney or your local counsel for any advisement about what your community can or cannot do potentially with some of these solutions. So I now introduce Miss Jacqueline. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, and everyone, thank you so much for your patience as we got started a few minutes late, but I'm so excited to be here and to share the knowledge and experience of electrifying community associations throughout the city. So thank you so much for joining. As Melissa said, yes, I have been in the community association manager role as a CAM, as an on-site manager, as well as a regional director, which assisted in electrifying high rises and HOAs and condominiums here throughout the Metro Atlanta area. So what we're here today to do is to discuss the challenges that and some of the solutions that we have seen in our experience in community associations. Can I get to the next slide? So just to review our agenda and kind of what we're going to go over today or this evening. Again, introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about who we are and where our current environment is with the EV revolution. What does the install and maintenance process look like for a community? What are some questions that you should ask yourselves when you're considering EV charging stations? And what are some exclusive partnership opportunities that EnviroSpark has specifically with Heritage Property Management Group? And then we'll open it up to Q&A if anyone has any questions. I know that this is in presentation mode, but if you do have a question that pops to your mind, just throw it into the Q&A so we don't forget, and we'll be able to get to that at the proper time when Melissa cues us up. Next slide. So who we are. This is a beautiful picture of our CEO and co-founders, Aaron and Stephanie Luque. EnviroSpark was actually established 9 years ago. We just celebrated our 9th birthday last week. So our mission and what we do is driven by how we do it, right? So we want to make sure that we increase the adoption of EV vehicles, and we also want to make sure that we make the accessibility of charging those EV vehicles as part of our mission. So that's what drives us, and that's why we do what we do. Next slide. So what does EnviroSpark do? We actually specialize, we're full turnkey service provider. So we specialize in design, engineering, construction, maintenance, hardware, software solutions. And here's actually a sample of a level 2 charger here as well, and some samples of what our some of the signage looks like that could look at your property. What you don't see here is kind of the back of house support that we can offer as well. And those are town hall meetings, committee meetings, meeting with boards of directors to educate and to get them to understand what questions to ask. Because the general question always is, how much does a charging station cost to get one? And it's always going to be, it depends, right? Everybody's community is different. And that's why I think how our organization partners with your vision and your budget and how we can bring that into fruition. Next slide. So, deploying EV charging. So founded in 2014, we have installed over 7,000. I'm going to say that's about 7,500 now since this was done. We have commissioned quite a few projects over the last 30 days. We are a national provider, so we are licensed in all 50 states and we have certifications in 20 plus. The EV ITP is really special because that's a GSA rating that we have under our federal program. So we do have a government department as well that works with NEVI, which is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, to bring charging accessible to interstates and highways. Some of our partners that you can see here, I don't know if you know the first one, but Tesla is a real big one that we work with, and we've installed quite a few plugs for them, as well as Volkswagen, Georgia Power, and Starwood is another residential multifamily apartment community that we work with as well. All right, next slide. All right, so we talked about GSA and federal contracts, all right? So if you can see here in the Southeast, Zone B, EnviroSpark actually has an excellent rating, and we are one of 12 approved installers under that federal program. So that's something we take great pride in as we live our mission. They're bringing that accessibility across our interstates and highways. Next slide. So what does that mean, right? Where are we? Everybody is talking about EV. I know that just in the last 6 months, as I drive up 400, I started counting the number of Teslas that I would see on the road. And my goal was to hit 25 by the time I went from Buckhead to Cumming. And I think I've already reached that 3 or 4 months ago. So the tipping point, right? As we can see, and reports and data tell us, when a municipality, a city, a state hits a 5% adoption rate, that's 5% of the drivers on the road driving an EV vehicle, you're going to see those numbers increase exponentially. They typically go from 5, and they're not going to 7, they're going to 10, they're going to 15. And so we're seeing that climb not only here in the Georgia market, as Georgia Power and Southern Company is also driving that infrastructure and that accessibility through commercial and destination programs, but you're also seeing that through rebate programs as well for condominium and associations. Next slide. All right, so increased models. How many EVs do we have versus the sales and what's forecast for the future? So now we know today there are over 10 million EV drivers on the road. And we know that once our United States as a whole has reached that 6% tipping point where we are now, we're going to see that increase again more, which is going to require more infrastructure and more ways for EV drivers to be able to charge their car. What we're seeing in reports is by the year 2030, we're going to need about 160,000 level 2 chargers and at least 11,000 level 3 chargers throughout the United States. And that's publicly accessible as well as residential and single family and condominium establishments. Next slide. So infrastructure, right? We talked about the increase of EV and the adoption and people driving, but the question always is where are we going to charge? There's a lot of condo owners out there that are, if you're in a congested area, let's say you're in the city of Atlanta, they're charging at superchargers. They're not charging overnight to lengthen the life and extend the life of their batteries. So I could go into very deep conversations about how to save the battery and extend the battery life, but most importantly, how are we going to be able to charge that battery? So here you can see the forecast models are telling us that we have got to be able to keep up with the growth. And I think that's what you're seeing as community associations, as businesses, as the federal government is looking to see how are we going to get this and reach that zero emission. By 2050, 2060, 2075, every municipality, state, and market and region typically have their own, they're all driven with their own restrictions and regulations and their own goals. Same thing for you as a condo association. You have to understand what your demand is. You might have one driver, you might have 10. So understanding what your current demand is and what you actually have as infrastructure and available electricity in your community is going to be able to allow you to say, okay, what do I need now? This is our plan for the future. And then how are we going to fund that backwards? And that's working with your legal counsel, that's working with your reserve study engineer, and understanding what is our end goal and kind of working backward from there. And how can we offer some relief for the current demand that we have for homeowners that are unable to charge at home? Next slide. All right. So what is retrofit infrastructure? If you are not a new development, you are a retrofit, right? So it's not something going in immediately. So in new developments and municipalities that we are seeing in our current environment, 20% of all parking has got to be dedicated for EV charging. So every crane, when you're driving down 75, 85, and you count those cranes up in the air, all those parking lots that are associated with those buildings, 20% of those parking spaces have got to be electrified. Doesn't mean that you have to install the actual charging station, but you definitely have to have the infrastructure, the electrical capability to have 20% of your spaces. Developers are also looking to electrify more than 20%. There's taxes and rebates and incentives and subsidies that if they go above that 20% threshold, they could also see another capital return. So you're going to see adjustments like that made as well. So in the retrofit, the first thing you need to do is get a property evaluation. Understand, again, what are you holding as a community? How much electricity do you have available? What parking do you have available? Whether that's assigned, which becomes a little tricky unless you get a group of homeowners together, and we can kind of talk about that later. But understanding a plan, but also understanding what is your current demand and what is your vision for the future. Next slide. Service and solutions. This is my favorite part. Okay. So EnviroSpark, when we say full turnkey, that is one person, that is one partner that can take you from start to finish. I know that as a community manager, when you're managing large capital projects, you might have 4 or 5 vendors, sometimes 7 to 10 vendors that you're working with. You might have someone that's doing, general contracting, somebody that's painting, somebody that's, working on the roof, somebody that's working on the EFS. This allows you to hold responsibility to one person. And so when you go out there and you're starting to have these conversations and you're speaking with providers, understand what kind of partnership are they going to offer you. Anybody can sell you a charging station. You can buy one on Amazon, but who's going to be there to help you and to support you and give you the data and the resources to make those decisions as a board of directors, right? We always need something to be able to validate what we're doing. And that's really important to have that vision and constantly reassess and understand if you have to pivot or change that plan. So we'll talk about solutions. Again, we talk about the evaluation. It's very important. What does that evaluation look like? It's maybe 30 minutes of time. We always encourage any committee members, board members, EV drivers in the community to join if they choose, or it can just be completely exploratory. What that is we're going to look at your main switchgear. The switchgear in your community or your property is going to be your main source of electricity. Right? What is servicing that portion of the grid? That's going to let us know, do you have enough ampage to do X amount of stations, right? So there's different solutions again when it comes to charging. There's dedicated breakers that go directly to each one. There's also load sharing we can get into later. And that's basically being able to increase the number of plugs with limited amount of electricity. So there's different products, there's different creative solutions for you to be able to bring this to the community with the right partner. Also, besides the installation, and once those are there, who's going to manage it? I know that I'm not an electrician, and it was difficult for me to understand, why is this thing not working? You could chase a line from 7 levels of parking garage. So being able to have someone that's monitoring your equipment, that knows when it's down, if and when it's down before you do, is extremely important. Uptime, there's nothing more aggravating than driving up somewhere to go use a charger and that charger isn't working. So it's always in our best interest to make sure that those are online for the use of our EV drivers. Next slide. So installation outline. A lot of people ask, well, if I sign today, how long will it take us to get charging? Well, my answer is always, it depends. You never know, right? Everybody's community is different, but it also depends on what electricity you have. Do you need extra electricity to be able to electrify and install these charging stations? That is probably going to be your main caveat and what drives your plan and how you're going to do future planning. So from the site walk, you go into pre-construction. Pre-construction is submitting engineer drawings, going to the city for permitting, getting those approved, pre-construction walks. That is typically the longest part of the process. The site walk is 30 minutes, right? We can identify, we're experts in our field. We don't do anything but EV charging. So we can probably go out there and within the first 10 minutes know, but 30 minutes will give us a good detailed outline and understand what we need to do and what you're holding. Pre-construction is obviously the development side, the infrastructure, the installation, the city getting involved. That's where it can be delayed. Construction, once everything's on site, will take a couple of weeks. So from start to finish, when all the stars beautifully align for us and the city actually gets through their backlog, we can look from start of signing of contract to actually commissioning those chargers in less than 4 to 6 months. Typically it's 4 to 6 months, given if holidays are involved and stuff like that. So when all the stars align, again, 4 to 6 months from start to finish. Next slide. So we talked about that service and maintenance. One thing about EnviroSpark ourselves is we are EV agnostic. So there's not one specific manufacturer or product that we work with. We do partner with several different solution providers that have, again, load sharing. In our industry, there's actually a term called smart and dumb, and that's just what they use. And that's a smart station or a dumb station. A smart station is going to allow us to collect data, whether we want to know who's using the charging station, when they're using the charging station, and how long they're actually using it when they're plugged up. So that gives us the information to give to the boards and to the communities to say, hey, you've got extremely high utilization on these 2 charging stations. It might be time to install another one, right? Because your adoption is starting to increase. You're seeing a higher number of EV drivers on your community. So with us being able to work with several different manufacturers and different providers, it allows us to be creative for different solutions that may work for one community, but may not work for another. In our program as well, there is an extended warranty. As you can see, there's annual inspections that are done of the equipment. And 0 administration. So when you're having an issue with it, you're not having to call the manager or call the assistant or the maintenance technician. You call one person, and that one person is able to come out within 24 to 48 hours in response time, as we are local here in the city, as well as satellite offices in Austin, Texas, and Charlotte, North Carolina. And San Diego, San Diego, California. So all encompassing all together, it's really understanding, like, what is it that you have? How much management do you actually want to hold once those are installed? And who is going to protect that investment that you've made onto your community? That's really important as well, which will take us to our next slide, which is key considerations to really think about and understand when you're looking to install these on your community. Again, what is your current demand versus your future? That's extremely important. You do not need a charging station at every single space in your community. maybe 100 years from now, maybe 150 years, hopefully we'll all be somewhere else at that time. But having that long-term plan at least lets you work backwards. And again, constantly surveying residents. I know there's annual meetings that we hold. It's great to have a survey or even a question on there as well as they turn back their ballots in, just getting real life temperature checks to be able to share that information in real time with homeowners is really important. The electrical capacity, again, you can get really creative when it comes to what you have to work with. The lead times on our electrical equipment, that's going to be really big because that's going to decide on whether are we going to work with what we have or are we going to try to plan for something a little bit bigger and kind of, save all of our peanuts for the bigger bag. So understanding that and getting the community's involvement and as well as their passion for driving this as well. Understanding the permitting and process timeline. That is probably key when it comes to the questions on, well, we've been sitting here for 6 weeks. Why isn't anything happening now? So our internal software allows us to communicate with boards and with property managers, whether that's through an update at your, desired cadence of, hey, I want to update every week that tells me what you're doing, what you've done this week and what you have planned for next week. That communication level is at your, at your desire and how you want it and how often you want to see that. The shared and assigned parking. This is probably 100%, I'd say 150% biggest challenge to condominium associations. Limited parking. It's just developers built these buildings and I guess they never thought anybody would come over and see us. And there's never enough parking in these condo high rises. So what's the solution? Right. So we talked about Georgia Power, and I have a little caveat here. As Georgia Power in 2018 had a wonderful program called the Make Ready program, and that allowed for any business to be able to apply for federal or not federal funding, for Georgia Power funding for infrastructure to bring, the EV charging to communities. Well, those funds were exhausted in round one from 2018 to 2020. They have allocated another large sum of money for 2023 and 2022, 2023, but there's a caveat in that as well. So they've revised the requirements and or restrictions to be able to qualify for that program. So if you have restricted parking, and that's any kind of parking spot behind a gate, which is going to be 99.999% of every condominium association out there, and HOAs, right, that are gated communities, is identifying a place that, hey, where can we put these communally? And or how can we identify how we can rework our parking garage? That could probably be a whole nother webinar that we can talk about later, but I can give you a high overview. There are parking engineers that actually work at garages, look at assigned spaces, understand where we need to move things and say, okay, here you go, just like a reserve. This is our recommendation based on assignment of the unit, how far they have to walk away from parking their vehicle, and maybe potentially reassigning it. Again, it does take buy-in from the community. So being able to communicate what efforts and discussions that you're having, even if you're not making decisions, it's on the agenda, we're talking about it. And maybe giving a little bit of information or backup on what was discussed in your meeting minutes that you share with your community. But at least knowing that it's on the agenda and it's something that is being discussed. Also, another thing you think about, and that's not on here, is going to be your future goggles. So any decision you make today is not going to impact you today. So, sometimes we have to put on our board hat and take off our board hat and our homeowner hat when we're making decisions and we're having discussions about how to drive change or implement different changes in our communities, is that the decision you make today is not going to affect you today. But guess what? Everything that we're doing is not going to get any cheaper. The demand is not going to decrease. It's only going to increase as you see, California, I think, is going to be on an island of its own, but their goal, they do have a vision. By 2050, they want to be zero emission. Is it realistic? I'm not sure, but they do have a goal. And I think that's the most important part, is they understand that, hey, this is what we want. How we get there is going to be a process, but at least we know what our end game is. Same thing for the board. So you have to think about that as well. And again, that's smart versus dumb. Do you want to enforce your charging station? So if someone comes up and they're fully charged, do they get a little ping on their phone that says, hey, you've got 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours to move your vehicle so that that next neighbor can charge their car? We have a mobile app. There's also RFID cards. Our software and hardware typically work with most access controls. So you don't have to be the homeowner with 5 fobs to get to the gate, to get to the door, to get to the gym. Typically, we can work with your access controls. Sometimes we can't. If they're little antiquated systems, then we do go to that RFID card. But that's going to be at the discretion of the board. How do we want to enforce? Can it generate some revenue? Right? Is there a fee structure that is aligned with that as well? So it could potentially be a small revenue generator, but that's also partnering with your attorney, making sure that it's a reasonable fine that you can actually enforce. So those are just some key considerations that you want to think about when you're saying, hey, we want EV charging. Here's some things that a checklist that you can go through and say, do we know where we would want to put them? Do we know if we want to make them enforceable or do we want to make them free? So again, I didn't go to the dumb station, so I apologize. A dumb station is basically an extension cord. It doesn't collect data. It's a direct connection from your control panel straight to the charging. It's just a conduit that allows. So it doesn't collect anything. It doesn't restrict a user. So if it is behind a gate, essentially only residents will be able to use that. But do you want to be able to create some revenue from the fee structures on that part? That will take me to our next slide. Oh, those are our key partners. I'll just a few people here that we've worked with in the past and have some great relationships with. So you can see that not only are we in residential, I would say people ask, hey, do you work in hotels? Absolutely. Anything with a parking lot, we can help, right? If you have an EV car or a need to charge it, we can help you. So see, these are some of the communities, commercial, university, and some municipalities that we've worked with too. Next slide. So Heritage, what does this mean for you? Oh, back 1 slide, sorry. What does this mean for you? What is this exclusive, amazing program that we have come up with for Heritage Property? Well, we have a network-sided program, and again, there is a qualification for this as well, but I would say that there's a very high majority that qualify, but prime choice for communities and community associations with limited funds, limited resources. We have roofs and interiors and carpets and all these things to paint. Do we really want to use our funds for the minority of the community? And that's an argument that is extremely valid and that we hear all the time. Why should the association pay for the 5 drivers that need to charge at home? So what does that look like? So we've been able to offer a network program that gives 0 upfront cost to the association. What that looks like is if you have available electricity, and we work only off of available electricity. If we have to move it, right, from one part of the property to another with step down transformers, again, a little bit more technical, that is also doable, but we typically want to work off the electricity that you have. Most associations that I have worked with, and I've worked with EnviroSpark actually for the last 7 years out of their 9 years of existence, electrifying communities just like yours and high rises and condos and HOAs just like yours, bringing this to fruition. So with that said, we cover the installation, we cover the design, and we cover all the hardware costs. So there's no cost onto the community. What we do is we charge the end user. So if EnviroSpark comes in and we say we will put the capital to be able to build that partnership with you, I'll do Rogers Communities, right? And you will go into what I call a semi-long-term relationship with us. We'll get to know each other and become great friends. But that allows us to recoup our capital as we forecast that adoption to increase in our Metro Atlanta and Georgia, and of course, nationwide. So that brings the low cost down to the property. It's only the driver that's paying to be able to use it. You also get the reports and data that allow you to drive your decisions, right? How are we going to, do we need another charging station? We'll give you that data to say, yeah, it's not time yet. Even if you have 4 or 5 drivers saying, oh, we need it, you only need one charging station. Our data and reports tell us one plug will accommodate up to 4 to 5 drivers in a more urban development. Again, if you're going to go suburbs, we're going to probably put a couple more charging stations than just the 1 or 2 per every 4 vehicles. But that's where your surveys come in that help drive that data and allow us to say, hey, this is what we think you need, but we also need that data from your community specifically to say, hey, okay, what we thought is completely wrong, or it's right on target. So the ability to scale the charging as well, that's where that report and that data helps drive those decisions and where you want to go as a community and how we get there together. So I'm an extremely fast talker. I think my next slide is my Q&A. And again, I put a QR code here too, if you want to visit our website. But I will open it up to Q&A to see if anybody has any questions. I'm pretty sure there's a couple.
Yes. So you've done excellent. Thank you, Jacqueline, because she went into a little bit more detail, when you talk to our managers. So I kind of want to, if you don't mind, I'm just going to hone in on that. I know you had kind of referenced that you had worked with EnviroSpark for the last 7 years or so, just working with some of the high rises and so forth that when you were, a regional director, that's kind of what you did. Do me a favor and just break down for me, because I know nothing of what you speak of, but I'm so curious. Do me a favor and just kind of tell me the differences you had, and we did get a question from the audience. What are the difference between those charging stations that you talked about, the difference between the L2 and the L3? I know our managers had a lot of questions surrounding that too.
Yes.
And what that looks like.
Yeah, that is a great question. So right now what we see, there are 3 levels of charging. Level 1 is going to be able to plug into any outlet that you have in your home at this time. A level 2 charger is what's going to require a 240 volt amp breaker, which would be kind of what your dryer at home would plug into. So that's going to give you about 40 to 50 miles per hour of charge when you're charging. You're pulling at a higher kilowatt per hour. And then a level 3 is what they call a DCFC, and that's just an acronym for direct connection fast charge. And that's going to be able to allow you to charge from 0 to 100% in less than 45 minutes, depending on the capacity of your EV. So your battery capacity is what I'm talking about. So you will find that, your smaller EVs, when you come to your Chevy Bolts will typically be a 150 mile range. You get into the Tesla Model 3s that give you a 300 mile range. You go a little higher. There are some long range EVs that can, even Lucids, that can go up to 500. So that scale of charging time is going to be dependent upon the capacity of your battery, right? So the capacity of the battery is going to dictate on how long you're going to have to charge. So understanding, when you're looking at the community and you're saying, hey, I want to get charging, you have to understand what the demand is to be able to say, okay, this is where we need it and where are we going to put the parking. Those are going to be the big 2 caveats when it comes to how are we going to bring it to the community, because infrastructure is expensive. Georgia Power is not allowing for new electricity to go in unless it's dedicated specifically for EV charging. That EV charging infrastructure from Georgia Power is looking at a 36-month lead time. So that's when we talk about like future goggles, right? That decision you make today, you may not have any electricity available. You might be completely capped out. And if we come back to you and say, okay, in order for you to meet your current demand, you may need 2 charging stations. And with that, you can say, all right, how much infrastructure do you want to do now? How much installation do you want to do now? So that's another caveat, is the power, but how are you going to get it to the space? Where does it have to go through? So those are some of the key considerations as well that you should think about.
And I think one of the things that you had mentioned too, in alignment with this, so let's just say we have an L2 charger, right? Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about?
You do.
Okay, right. Yes. Okay, great. I was listening. So let's just say that we have an L2. How many spaces does that take up? Did I hear you say it takes up 4 spaces, or how many spaces does it take up for that charging station? Because that's the important piece that you're talking about, right?
Yes, the actual spaces. So different equipment can be installed different ways, right? So most equipment will either typically stand on a pedestal and or be mounted against a wall, right? So it just depends on where that prime parking location is. And when you go back to your community manager or your maintenance guy and you say, hey, I want to go see where the switchgear room is. Where's our main electrical room? Then you identify where's our path of least resistance to get there. Your standard parking space, I believe, is 10 feet wide. I think it's 10 feet wide. It might be 12 in some areas, but it really dictates on that city and that municipality on what the space is. There are ADA requirements, of course, when it comes to charging that have to be larger spaces, and then charging pedestals lowered to accommodate for ADA. So again, condominium associations are not, unless you're multi-use or open to the public, ADA is not a key consideration that you would have to think about on a condo association.
Okay, so that was super helpful, and I appreciate that. And we are now starting to percolate some conversation, which I love. And so, keeping in that vein and talking about to plug it in, this is a very good question. Why don't we just put a plug in each garage for those that have electric cars in your community? Which seems like a valid question. You know, hey, if I think you had said that 20%, I believe.
20%.
Right? So, hey, if we already have that infrastructure in place, even though we may not be using it as an FYI, you might not know that you already have that community. But so let's just say we meet that requirement for the 20%. That's a very valid question. Like, hey, why do I even need to have your charger? Why can't I just use the plug?
So I don't know if the question is coming from an HOA or a condo. So I will say, so that's a really good question. So there's 2 different solutions when it comes to HOAs and condos. HOAs, and I'll say as single family homes, we'll call them horizontal, right? You're spread out, and I'll even say that for townhomes that are horizontal, that are attached in horizontal. I'll call those the HOAs. I'll consider the condos high rises. In the HOA and single family homes, yes, there is still a main source of power. There is still a grid that you could potentially exhaust if X many people start tapping in and installing it. I don't know of any municipality in the city that if you tap into electricity, that electric provider wants to know what you're doing. So there is a permit that is required, and most associations have architectural modification forms that are required, that any work that is done on your community has to be provided to the association with certificates of insurance. So you should understand what scope of work is being done. Yes, it's their home, but it's still communal living. It still affects us as a whole. So when you think about that grid and you think, and let's say, we'll just call it 100 homes. And you think about that one grid serving the 100 homes, there's a specific allocation of electricity for each one of those homes. Whether you exhaust all of the actual ampage that's allocated for your home will be dictated by that certified licensed electrician that you hire that says, okay, yes, we see some's available, but some people add on to their homes. Some people love to have 15 televisions in their living room. Not saying that eats up a lot of electricity, but just saying that some people have servers in their home that I know eat up a lot of electricity. So it really depends on that single family homeowner. Our solution would be to be a provider to help with installation. Our solution, when it comes to those creative ideas and being able to bring that to condominiums and high rises with A, limited resources, B, limited real estate. That's kind of where we shine. But being able to help communities like that, let's say you're an HOA with a lifestyle right? You have a golf course attached to you. You have a wonderful meeting place or a clubhouse that is frequently, visited by by your neighbors, by family members. You got a great pool. Would that be an area that we would want to be able to put a charging station? What if I'm a single family homeowner and I don't have an EV, but my friend Melissa comes over and she does, and she's staying with me for a week and she has nowhere to charge. So some communities are also looking to say, hey, where can we put one just communal? If someone needs one, maybe they don't want to maybe they don't have the electrical capacity. Maybe they don't want to spend the funds right now to be able to install that outlet in their home. Maybe they rent it and they can't, maybe that owner doesn't allow them to do it. So there's so many different variables to think about on the single family. There are definitely solutions, but I think our key solutions and kind of where we are able to help and assist bringing this to life is really for those ones with restricted resources and restricted real estate.
Okay, so and I know you did a fantastic slide kind of talking about the process and so forth, but from a manager, selfishly from a manager standpoint, and let's just say we've got some self-managed friends that might be joining us and don't have the benefit of partnering with professional management to kind of be the liaison between you potentially and some of the work or the different vendors that you were talking about. What is the first step other than contacting you? What is the first step that we really need to do? What's the thought process that we need to have when we're aboard? And we're saying, hey, listen, we've gotten a lot of people that are coming to us talking about this topic. What's our position as a building? What's our position as an association? We might not be able to have this be the capability because we're doing EFIS repair or hey, we're working on the roof over the next 2 years. But maybe, like we've kind of talked about this, friends, this is a future focused class potentially for some of you. I know that there are people in the audience that are working on this stuff right now, but what do I need to know to just get started so that I can sound intelligent when I talk to you?
I think the most important thing as a board, again, and I'll keep going back to this. Yes, it's a discussion you need to have, but you need to understand the temperature and the gauge of your community. Okay. If you're a single family home, most of those single family homeowners do have, if you're an EV driver, trust me, you have a charger in your garage. You don't ever go to the gas station anymore. But for the condo side, it's really understanding what is your demand. You can walk briskly through your parking garage at 8 o'clock at night and count the EVs drivers that are in your community. You might have one that's probably a really big headache, but you can't manage to the majority or the minority. You have to manage to the majority. So understanding what is a majority threshold for a condominium association. If adoption is at 5%, I would say 5% of your drivers is probably a really good threshold to say, okay, so if I'm 100 units and I've got 5 drivers, it's definitely time to start having a conversation, because if you don't have it there, you're going to lose homeowners. Again, you got to think about retention. You got to think about marketability. You got to think about sustainability. Whatever drives you to go to EV, whether it's removing carbon footprints, making sure that we're leaving the planet better than when we got it. Having that foresight to say, okay, this is what we need today, and this is what we want to do by 2030, 2050. So we know by 2035 and 2040, there will not be any ICE engines available. Volkswagen, Mercedes, Ford, GM, we know that there's not going to be a gas engine available. Does that mean there's not going to be one on the road? Absolutely not. It's going to take far longer again for us to be able to get rid of before we're completely zero emissions. We're not going to be Norway for a very, very, very long, or Sweden for a very, very long time. So again, making that plan and saying, okay, I've got 100 parking spaces. Most associations and condos, 50% of your units are going to be 1 bedroom. Not every single one of those 1 bedrooms are going to have an EV. So you might even cut that into 50% and then look at your others, right? Some units that are 3 bedrooms have 2 or 3 parking spaces. They do not need to have a charging station in every single space. So it's really understanding your unit count versus the assigned parking, because not all 2 bedrooms have 2 spaces and not all 1 bedrooms have 1 space, right? It really all depends on your community. So looking at that, identifying that partner that has data. We have been doing this for 9 years. We've got tons of data. I think that's another thing with Elon Musk, right? And Tesla, he has tons of data, and that's what people need. We need to know, how are we going to make these decisions going forward when we have no information here sitting with us? So that's what helps us be able to be that resource to say, okay, let's look at your community holistically. Let's look at it together holistically. What part of the city are you in? Where is adoption increasing? Where are your rebates? What is your budget? Do you have a budget? You know, and again, there's resources and tools to say, you can go on any government website or a local state website and see what subsidies and rebates. You can go to our website and click a state and say, okay, this is what's available right now and active in the state of Georgia. It can also sometimes tell you what's coming up as well, and when those funds will be available and when those applications will be open. But funding, Georgia Power has again that great program. It's a 5-year term, and it's Spark Fund that goes straight onto your Georgia Power account to allow associations to at least get the electrical power here. That's a solution, and then allowing those homeowners, if they want to tap into their parking space. So association, it's kind of a 50-50 relationship. Again, vision and goal, right? Looking at the number of parking spaces and kind of identifying a conversion rate versus the number of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedroom units. You have to know not just the number of parking, but how many of those parking spaces are dedicated to 3 bedroom units, 2 bedroom units, and then kind of working backwards from there. That will give you a good foundation and baseline to say, okay, this is what we have. How are we going to get to X? And we don't want to be, and maybe your goal is to be 100% electrified, right? By the year 2080. And now you're going to your reserve guy saying, okay, this is our vision and our plan. How are we going to fund it? You can't just install infrastructure little by little. That will never be, I'm not going to say never, but it'd be highly unlikely, very impossible for Georgia Power to say, hey, yeah, we'll keep letting you, increase power. It's going to be a one kind of stop shop. You're going to have to make that decision and decide, how are we going to do that? Installation is key as well. Are you going to put them on the top of the garage? Are you going to put them at the bottom of the garage? Are you going to put them outside behind the loading dock? Again, path of least resistance. It might not be the most attractive area, but it will definitely relieve those drivers that are having to go to Lenox, having to go to Atlantic Station or somewhere to get that supercharge. And again, that supercharge is only available for Tesla. So those are Tesla superchargers, right? We talked about those different plugs that go in. By 2025, Ford and GM will be able to use that Tesla plug. You buy a Ford in 2025, you will get the adapter to go to any Tesla supercharger to be able to use those chargers. And just like as you buy a Tesla, they give you a universal charger that can be used universally. So it's kind of backwards as well. But again, understanding, that is probably the biggest obstacle, is understanding what you have, because you have that one or that handful of drivers that are probably causing a lot of headache because they're frustrated, right? Our data and reports tell us 80% of EV drivers want to charge at home or work. So that's where we're seeing the increase of charging stations as well, and the accessibility being done at home and work. Because why? That's where we spend most of our time. So if it takes 4 to 6 hours for you to charge your vehicle from 0 to 100%, you're going to be able to do that while you're at work or while you're at home.
So I love that you talked about the difference with the chargers and where you can actually use them, because that was something that definitely our managers ask questions about. So it seems to be that there's a lot of really healthy conversation. Plus, I do like that, solutions are being adopted, the conversations being had right now, and the people that are genuinely pioneering the experience for all of us, they're kind of, that's the resource in the data that you're also getting back. So coming kind of in line with that, this is a great question about condominiums and specific assessments and really how that works and kind of the charge back. And so I think some of the audience heard, wait, what did you just say? You're going to specifically bill the homeowner that's using it. So could you just kind of talk about how the billing, I know you were talking about the rebates and so forth, but obviously how an association handles the billing aspect back to the owners.
Yes. Well, so our most attractive program for condominium associations is that ESpark network, right? That zero out of pocket for the association, being able to get charging there. So essentially, it's EnviroSpark as an organization making a tactful, educated decision to say, hey, we want to partner with Rogers Communities, and we're willing to put upfront all the capital to be able to install 2, 4, 1, 3 charging stations on your community based on your current demand, right? We're not going to put something there that's not going to be used. That's exhausting our resources and our funds. So we tactfully, through models and calculations, see, okay, we can put 2 charging stations on Rogers Community. It's going to cost X dollars. It's going to take X number of years for us to come back. That equals that semi-long-term relationship that we're going to be in, right? And then essentially that end user, the driver. So if I'm a homeowner at Rogers Community and Rogers Community is under the ESpark network, I, the homeowner, will be able to charge my EV vehicle at home, but I will pay the same kind of retail market rate that's surrounding that area, right? That's going to be in line with the cost versus benefit. So there has to be a little bit of give and take. And I think it's really important to have those committee meetings, town halls, just open sessions to have open dialogue and full transparency on how you guys are going to implement this and how will that user be charged. You have to look at the cost, right? It's not minimal amounts of money that we're talking about to install. If we have to trench, if we're boring through concrete, if we're x-raying for post-tension cables, there's a lot of resources that go into that. So what we ask of you is that driver is essentially going to allow us to recoup our capital, and hopefully adoption will increase enough where we can actually go in and start seeing revenue on it as well. But adoption has to increase, and that's kind of us investing in you, investing in us, investing in you. So that end user that plugs up, that homeowner, me, I'm going to maybe pay $2.50, $3 an hour to charge potentially. And please do not quote me on that. I'm just pulling numbers out of my air, but I'm going to charge maybe a quarter more per hour to charge at home, but it didn't cost my association anything. We weren't specially assessed to have to bring this to the condominium. And then again, the EV drivers are happy because they can charge at home. So it's a win-win, but again, it's also got to be an understanding that, hey, we're bringing this in at zero. You might pay a slightly, and again, when I say slightly, it's extremely slightly rate to be able to get that capital back. And essentially that's the program in a nutshell. We are not a publicly traded company. We are private with private investors and private capital that allows us to strategically partner with community associations and businesses to say, hey, let's partner together and let's drive this mission to increase adoption, to remove our carbon footprint, and to be sustainable for the future.
So I think that's a really great explanation of how that worked. And I think the focus for a lot of people is they want to do the right thing. They want to see what the options are. And a lot of people sometimes forget from time to time, not all. But let's just say, for example, I had an electric vehicle and I'm in a single family dwelling. If what you just said is true, I'm going to be paying as the homeowner in my single family house. I'm going to be paying to plug in my vehicle in my own residence, which therefore I am incurring that additional cost to be able to charge. It's a very similar, if what I'm hearing you say, it's a very similar program to that. Hey, listen. Yes, we want to be able, this is a large attraction for our building where we're located, for our community, because some are garden style too, and I don't want to take that away from all of y'all.
I'm working with a garden style now. There's still challenges for garden style, right? Absolutely.
I actually think that probably would offer a little bit more because you're looking at availability of that path of least resistance that you were just talking about. But people are going to pay, period, right? If you are making that conscious decision to buy an electric vehicle, you also understand that you're not paying for gasoline or diesel like the rest of others on the road. You're now paying for electricity. So there is a valuation exchange that does need to take place. And what I'm hearing you say is that EnviroSpark Energy actually really allows associations to be strategic about this. And I know we keep saying that word tonight, but it's really true. And you're putting the capital for the most part up front for the association. I don't know if anybody just heard what she said. That means no special assessments. That means no passing of a special meeting or any of those things, right? Like we don't even have to do any of that. No loans. We don't have to have so the things, think about this, condo owners, the things that detract your homeowners, like loans and things on a closing statement, could equally benefit your association because now you might not have that on those closing questionnaires, and you have another amenity that you're offering the community. So again, think some of the application. Yes, I was just about to say some of the things that Jacqueline's talking about. It just is going to depend really on your association and what that's going to look like for you. So I just I really liked how you explained that. And I think sometimes this is a very new topic of consideration. And so we want to be able to break it down to digestible bites, but I mean, this is kind of like a win-win when you're looking at it, especially for Atlanta, which is our main market here in Georgia, of course. And we have a lot of associations that, you currently partner with and that are curious and are doing the work to set up their communities and have those discussions. Maybe you're not doing anything right now, friends. We get it. Times are tough for some associations, right? But for those of you that are healthily funded, that are constantly having these really great conversations, or you may have been putting this topic off for a really long time, and now it's bubbling to the surface, and it's really something that you need to start having this conversation. Jacqueline is really going to be the best person for you to talk to because she understands your position, right? And this is one of the biggest things that we at Heritage University do. We try to make sure that people healthily understand the education behind the why, so that you can speak confidently to your homeowners. You are a homeowner too. You want to benefit from the things that are going on within your community. So we want you to have that healthy balance. This is a really important question, and I kind of saved it for last.
Oh yeah.
But how does this impact our insurance, friends?
Oh, well, that's the best question. It's always the best question that comes out. So we always say whoever owns the equipment, right? Whoever owns the equipment is who's liable for the equipment. Right. So if you as an association say, hey, we want to dictate our rate. We want to own and operate our own equipment. Yeah, we want some smart stations out here, but we're going to charge X dollars an hour. We're going to charge a $50 fine if they don't move out. We want to collect everything. We have the electricity. We just want you to take care of it for us. That is absolutely an option for you to do. It's not always the best option because nobody really wants to be the manager of another and I don't want to call it a liability, but it's a piece of equipment, right? Pieces of equipment age, piece of equipment go down. Who is going to be that person to take care of that asset on your community? That is going to be the person that invested into your community that says, I will take on that liability. I will be the one that actually handles all of that insurance. So yes, that would actually fall depending on the program that you select. If you own and operate it, I will 100% take the liability on it. If you own and operate it and it's yours. But if it's something that we own and we're in a partnership together, that is something that comes on to EnviroSpark. And that's something that you should definitely ask if you're interviewing and you're doing your due diligence. Make sure that you understand those restrictions too.
And just as a, again, property manager side, we do have a couple more questions for those of you that are staying with us. That thank you so much. When we're kind of going through this, and you're talking about insurance related things, and for those of you that didn't just hear that, if EnviroSpark is in that partnership with you, there really isn't going to be that immediate impact to your insurance infrastructure. So just keep that in consideration. But do you as an organization, since you are so versed, right, especially you yourself, and I'm putting a lot of pressure on you, but do you as an organization take a look at our governing documents? Do you take a look and see how our operations are? Because I know you talked about deeded parking spaces and so forth. So is that part of the process when you, aside from the inspection, or when you come out and you do the site inspection, is that something that you work with our communities and say, hey, listen, I noticed this. This is how we're going to have to do that. Is that something that you do?
Absolutely. So I think that's as being someone that has sat in your seat, right, and been in the community association role as a manager, I've had this discussion probably over 50 times in the last 2 years, and with different boards, communities, one last week, one tomorrow. So it's so exciting to see that it's growing and adoption is growing, and everyone wants to identify what is the best solution for our community. And I would love to be that partner to be able to say, hey, these are going to be the best solutions for you. They may not always be the best solutions for me, but our mission is not to sell you a charging station. Our mission is to bring accessibility to everyone that, again, aligns with the increase of EV adoption. We want to remove our carbon, our greenhouse emissions gas footprint. We want to leave the earth better than we did before. So being able to drive that mission through what we do is really what's key and exciting. As a CAM, being able to sit there and say, I can help you go through. I am not an attorney. I will disclaimer, I am not an attorney. Do not ever let an attorney say that I can play an attorney on television sometimes, but there will always be that, hey, you might want to partner with your attorney for some interpretation on this. But yes, as a CAM in that role, I can at least help decipher and work through. And I think that's key in my role, and being in that support role. My focus is multifamily and condos. So that's my world. I loved being a part of it, and I'm still a part of it, just playing a different role and being able to bring a different kind of value to communities. That's going to be exponentially important to how we drive our mission. So again, yes, to answer your question, I'd be happy to look through the declaration and work with your legal counsel to ask any questions or highlight some questions you could bring back to your manager, vice versa.
And you work with our reserve studies and all of those things too, because obviously, while it's not your responsibility to tell us how we're going to fund our project specifically, you do want to know that we have a potential to pay you back at some point, right?
Again, depending on your program, there would be no payback.
Sure. You're right.
So it would just be, hey, it's a partnership, and that allows me to, again, we're charging that end user, right? We're not charging the association. It's whoever decides that they're going to drive up to that parking space and plug up. That is who is paying for the amenity today, necessity tomorrow.
Right. Oh, I love how you said that. Okay. So last couple of questions. These are great. And this is a good one that I want to segue into. Have you done solar plus storage systems? I've never heard of this, so I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear you answer.
Oh man, I want to know who asked that question. That is such a good question. It is already here. We have not, EnviroSpark Energy Solutions has not done an installation like that yet. We are working and speaking currently with some partners that do offer that. There's so many new products. We're so new in where we are in this movement, right? So there's battery storage that's available. There's solar that can offset some grids, right? Again, solar has come tremendously a long way in the last 10 or 20 years. The ROI is better. They look prettier. They come in little trees now. They're more aesthetically pleasing. So yeah, there's so many new things. And again, I'm not going to say that the newest thing on the market is going to be the best thing for the community. Solar is not cheap. And the ROI on that may not even be enough to offset the 4 or 5 chargers that you have, but it could potentially offset heating your pool in the wintertime, because that's extremely expensive, or offsetting maybe parking garage lighting. So That really depends on how many charging stations. Where, if you're in a parking garage, you would have to have a roof on the parking garage to be able to install solar. Most parking garages don't, 50-50, have roofs on their top levels. So again, that it depends. Yes, it depends. Can it be done? Absolutely.
I love that in everything community association management related, the answer, friends, is always, it depends.
It depends.
It really is such a valid answer. Okay, so we were talking about this a little bit earlier. You had mentioned in the first couple of slides when we were talking about the 20% requirement and those types of things. There's a question about having available electricity. What does that exactly mean? Could you elaborate on that?
Yes. So when you're in your switch gear, right? It's kind of like being at home and you go into the, your lights go out, you go to the control panel and you're switching your breakers on and off. Sometimes when you open that box, there might be some slots available where there's no switcheroo breaker in there. Sometimes that can tell us, depending on the little number on top, on if you have any available electricity in that control panel. That control panel will tell us what is the maximum capacity at the top of it. And then it'll tell, and then as we read through the breakers or the control panel part of it, it'll tell us how much. It might be let's just say even numbers, 100 amp control panel, and you've only got 4 20 amp breakers in there. We know that you're only using 80 amps of that 100 amps. Or wattage. I'm totally don't even know if I'm using the right language, but the little breakers, you have 100 available, you're only using 80, that lets us know that there's 20. If your EV charging station requires 204 volts or 110 or 104 volts, we're going to know if you have available electricity. Your main switch gear is not going to be like your home. Your main switch gear is going to service everything on, typically 99% of the time, it depends, is going to service your entire community, your parking garage, your pool, everything is going to be allocated there. So that's going to be able to tell us, you might have some power on the 6th floor, you might have a little bit of power on the 3rd floor, but a load study, again, so let's talk about that 80 amp control panel we're using. We may not be pulling all full 80 amps out of that control panel, right? Because you have that breaker for your dining room and you've got the breaker for your living room. Well, you might not have something plugged in every outlet in your living room. So you might have 20 amps dedicated to that living room, but you're only actually pulling 12. So that leaves you 8 amps left. So identifying what that peak load is, and that's what that load study is we're talking about. We're looking at a 30-day time frame, whatever's like your cadence for your electricity bill, 30 days, and we go back 12 months. So we're not just looking at data today. We want to look at historical data as well that tells us what is peak load. What is the highest amount of electricity this thing has ever pushed out? And then we take that average to see what is available without over exhausting. And of course, killing the switchgear or control panel. We're going to make sure that it's within reasonable, that's going to, go through permitting. And they say, yes, absolutely, that's perfect. And we get through the permitting process. And that's the engineers department job. They're going to look at that and say, yes, this is what you can do. This is what can pass through permitting, and we can get that done. But it's essentially the same methodology of opening up your control panel at home. But you also have those properties that just have one main switch. And what does that mean? We have no idea how much power or is even allocated from one main switch. So that's, if you have one main switch gear, go ahead and talk about load study. That's something you definitely will have to do, because we can't see, by a visible assessment to say, hey, we think this much is available. So that load study really just verifies what you have.
So I feel very intelligent right now. I hope the entire audience does as well. I'm very impressed at just your cadence and having this conversation. You sound incredibly well-versed. How many buildings did you say in the last couple of years? I mean, you did several with your management company, right?
I've done 23.
My gosh. So from a property management standpoint, for us as property managers, that's, we ask each other a lot of questions. I know we might not work for the same companies, But the work that we do can oftentimes be the basics. And so sometimes it's leveraging the conversations and the relationships that we have with people. So boards, I really want you to understand the importance of having somebody. Listen, we work with vendors all the time that know exactly what it is that we do. It's so great when you have somebody who's sat in your shoes that really understands the day to day. And guys, they don't just understand the upfront, they know the conversations that you're having with your homeowners. And that's what Jacqueline's going to help you with. She already knows. She's been in those boardrooms. She's been in front of the managers, right? Her company, this is what they've been doing. She can speak intelligently and proficiently and say, hey, listen, here are some questions that we've gotten from the audiences before. This might be something that we may want to address. And this is also where we have the property manager hat that kind of comes on, because this is where you really want to leverage that relationship that you're building, because it's conversation, right? It's talking. And again, they're not going to put things. Oh, Mr. Kenworthy, we appreciate you. Park at Prescott Place, we love them. I hope you don't mind that I just said the name of your association, Arthur, but that was an excellent question. And FYI, this would be an association that I have to live in, just so you know. They've got their ducks in a row so nicely. So thank you for that really great question. I think we're about done for the evening, and we would love to have you back as time goes on. So definitely thank you so much for giving us some time in your evening. For those of you that are joining us and this was your first time, thank you so much. We hope that you learned just as much as I know I did. And we hope that if you're interested in some of these courses, or if this, you were like, wow, this was something that I was really, really interested in, go ahead and take a look at heritageproperty.com. If you go to our community focused education, you're going to see our calendar of classes. We list our classes that we had last year, plus the courses that we posted this year already. And the next course that we've got coming up is going to be all about insurance, because let's face it, I know we were talking about the nice to haves today. Now the next floor training that we're going to have in October is going to talk about the reality of what our budgets are really looking like right now, and how we can kind of offset some of those things. So we have a great YouTube page for those of you, if you've not had a chance to take a look at some of our prior courses. If you're curious at all about how to do budgets, and maybe this is your first time as a board member, we've got a class for you. We did it last year. We want you to be set up for success, so make sure you go check it out. For those of you joining us tonight, you will be getting some goodies from us in the upcoming days from tonight's airing. And if you are joining us on replay, thank you so much. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this a lot more. We sincerely appreciate everybody's time and attention, and we look forward to seeing you again in our audience really soon. Have a great night.